All right, it looks like it's 3. Should we get going?
3 on a Friday. I think we do want to end on time, so definitely.
Oh, I think so. Okay. All right. So welcome to our session. We are here to talk to you about the opportunities we have to take things that we've learned in remote learning and apply them to our classrooms after the fact when we get back to face-to-face teaching. So, Mike, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Mike Jones. I taught at DMAC. I taught at District 87 for 15 years, and I started at Metcalf. This is year 5 at Metcalf, and I'm lucky enough to be able to teach some methods classes, both elementary and middle school, and seeing some former peeps now that are all graduated in the wild. Now they're in my class, and Metcalf was fun, but it was even better when I got to recruit and chase after Kristi to see if she would join us over here at ISU Land.
So I'm Kristi Sutter. This is my 26th year of teaching, and I taught in District 87 here in Bloomington. I was in the classroom for 14 years, and then I moved to the library and computer lab. And then this is now my 3rd year at Metcalf. I came here as an instructional facilitator, so I still get to teach a few classes of makerspace to our Metcalf kiddos, but then I also spend the rest of my day working with teachers on how to innovate in their classroom. So, and I did come here because of Mike.
Kristi and I, we've been fortunate enough to do a lot of training together for the last quite a few years, all the way back from Audacity, one of our first projects way back in like 07. My students in my class always make a comment to my Met Night classes, like, if anyone you trust ever asks you to do something, always say yes. So she's always, when she's like, hey, Mike, do you want to do this? I'm like, yes, I want to do this. Yes, tell me about this STEM read. So thinking about just the pressures of how we felt in March when everything hit all at once, and then started looking at like what it was like in the beginning of the year. It had some different feelings, but looking at some of the press and looking to some of our louder critics, there's a lot of negativity about what online learning is and what remote learning is. And I think, at least I felt like there was a security of, we had some ways we could test, we could play around. We had a lot of forgiveness in the spring, but knowing that parents were really critical of the program, and that's how we were starting back, I don't know if it was a majority, but I felt it was a very loud minority that was really critical of where online learning was going to be. And Kristi, do you want to drive on the slides?
Sure.
Thank you. And actually, like, this is one that really just stood out for me most, and like op-ed, and no matter how good it's done, remote learning isn't as good. And I took that for a second and really thought about it. I'm like, you're totally right. It's not as good, because if we really want to look at it, I think actually we can make it better. We can be better in certain ways remote learning than in the classroom. And while we're looking at trying to make things normal, I think there's some opportunities where we need to kind of think about and where we can actually do better. Not saying it's perfect, and every positive has some negatives. And I think the big 3 concerns that we often hear is like the SEL connections, like how do our kids connect? Curriculum, like how do we make sure we're meeting the curriculum, especially with standard-based grading? Are we lowering the standards to make sure the kids can meet these? And even our instruction pieces, like how do we keep the kids engaged? How do we keep them mentally engaged? How do we have them wrestle with the curriculum? I think when we started talking about online learning, it reminded me a lot of the 5 stages of grief, where we had like the first stage of grief, like denial, like I don't have to teach online learning, right? And then we had the bargaining, and then depression, some anger pieces, and sometimes parents are moving through that as well. So we had a lot of problems in here with online learning. But even when we were talked about, and like our theme this year was returning back to normal, and I'm like, I don't want to return to normal. I want to do this better. I want to see what we can really do that we can knock it out of the park. A friend I used to teach with, Gary Kasork, actually always put in little children's pictures of like of famous adults, so that way kids could have more empathy for the character. So we all see Maya Angelou, and I guess I always have that picture of her on the back of a book cover. But like, what did she look like when she was a kid? Like, who might be listening to these stories? So just a little tidbit there is why we have that image in there. So to start this off, I think if we looked at the 3 kind of parts of like online learning to start with in the spring, and then like what we came to in fall. Spring was a lot of like, we were in survival mode. Like many of us, we were lucky enough to be on spring break when all of this was happening. And then we were given the gift of another week to do some planning and kind of plan out that 9 weeks. But we didn't know what was going to happen. Even if we felt like we were tech savvy, there's a lot of unknowns like internet connections and how do we get kids to log in and how do we assess and what do we hold accountable to. And I think the fall, I think even when I did teacher training, I was asking the wrong questions because a lot of it was looking back almost like an autopsy, like what went well and what didn't go well. And what did we wish we would have known that we did know now, which is fine. And also these are some of the same questions like anytime we have new curriculum pieces, right? Whether from one-to-one or smart boards back in the day. But I don't know until we started prepping for this conference is the question that I might should have asked is really, what are some of the benefits of remote learning that we have the opportunities to do now that we didn't have before? Like one side effect I noticed is like bullying is way down, right? So what are some opportunities at this platform? If we're looking at remote learning and giving the kids the gift of time and flexibility and asynchronous learning at times, what are some things that are way superior that we can do there that we couldn't do in traditional schools?
So that's where we wanted to take today's session. We wanted to really take time to look at what we can apply to make our face-to-face learning even better. Maybe you're familiar with the ISTE standards. The ISTE stands for the International Society of Technology and Education. There are standards out there for educators, for students, for instructional coaches, even for administrators. And it's all about how to innovate in education. The ISTE standards used to be very focused on tools, but it has now moved toward innovative practices in education. So we're going to start off, and most of the ISTE standards that we're connecting to today are the student standards. So I wanted to go through those just really quickly with you, and each of the takeaways that we're going to focus on, we're going to connect that to a standard so that you can feel confident that you're making the right moves in your classroom. So the first one up at the top is the Empowered Learner Standard. This is where we use technology to achieve and demonstrate our mastery. So our kids are using the technology to make their learning happen. Digital citizenship is going beyond just being kind to others when we are online, but it steps or dips its toe into intellectual properties and all of those kinds of things as well. So understanding our rights and responsibilities of using these digital tools. Next, we have the Knowledge Constructor Standard on the right-hand side. Knowledge Constructor is where our students are curating resources so that they can build their own background knowledge. This is really one of those steps towards empowering our students to take ownership in their learning. Down at the bottom, we have the Innovative Designer Standard. This is one of my favorites. I think the design cycle can be used in every single classroom. I was in Chad's session just a little bit ago, and I saw the design cycle going through so many of the things he talked about. So I definitely think that that's something that can be a school-wide movement as we go forward and come back to face-to-face learning eventually. We also have the Computational Thinker Standard down at the bottom. This is where we are coding, yes, but also helping our students understand analytical thinking in general and how we can break problems down. You can use that computational thinking even in an engineering situation where we are not using a computer at all, but just simply breaking down elements of problems and getting our students to think that way. We have on the left side the Creative Communicator Standard, where students are learning to express themselves clearly through digital media possibly or in other ways. And I think this has become one that has been super important in my classrooms as we've transitioned to remote learning and now hybrid learning. So, and finally, the Global Collaborator Standard. This is where we're using digital tools to expand our students' perspective and give them some enriched learning experiences. And this is one that Mike and I were most excited about this year. So we're going to start with that one. The global collaboration, the standard written is that students will use digital tools to broaden their perspectives and enrich their learning by collaborating with others and working effectively in teams locally and globally. And you might think, okay, well, we're not together in the classroom. How in the world can we meet these four collaboration standards with our students? But you might be surprised the opportunities that remote learning has brought us, and really ways that we can connect our students to people outside of our school walls. So, the first one here is focusing on expanding their understanding of backgrounds and cultures. The second one is a big one, 7B, where we're using technology to collaborate, obviously. C was working in teams, which was harder while we were in remote learning, much easier when we were together. But D is an excellent example of how we can move our work outside of our classrooms. And so one of the things that Mike and I have tried to do this quarter so far is connect with people outside in the outside world.
So I think if we think about the limitations of like having guest speakers in our class, think about it, it was always a hassle, like all the way from getting them there, finding parking, those little logistical things that kind of made it a barrier to get these experts to speak. But just in the remote learning, it's actually been quite easy to do this. We're all used to Zoom. We have the freedom of like at time, and maybe it may not be during the day, maybe it be at night, and we can record it and share it back out. But there's a lot of ways where we can get folks who are really knowledgeable on our subject into the room to kind of share their knowledge. Today I had Senator Rose come in and talk about the Muhammad Aquifer, and we started talking about pollution and some of the laws that they've passed. And it was just a 30-minute little quick talk, and it was from a friend of a friend. But it doesn't have to be even that level of an expert there. Maybe it's going to be someone where it's even at the city level or something about another connection or someone who has experience with it. Skype a Scientist is a great resource. I'm waiting for Zoom to like Zoom a Scientist to be tweak that around here. But what you can do is you can request all these different scientists for all these different ages. And if you have like 5 or 6 different project units coming up, you can start filling out these forms now and trying to get different guest speakers in to your classroom for it. It's a free service. It's all donations. And because it's free, sometimes like things just the scheduling doesn't work out right. But I've had some really good luck with who we can bring in. We've got a scientist who studies glaciers who just got back from Greenland, but he actually lives in Switzerland and teaches over there, and he's going to talk about it. Not only that, it's like when I do weather, I start typing in weather guest speakers. I'm looking for weather, especially government agencies, to be able to talk and bring in those connections. Kristi?
Another way of contacting these people is through social media. So in our Makerspace class, we've been podcasting and blogging as a way of finding our voice. And so just through social media, we've been able to connect with people who do this as a living, and they've come in, and luckily it's during their lunchtime. They have no problem meeting with our students. And so we've had, someone from the Disney food blog, someone from the St. Louis Cardinals come and talk with our students. So there are a lot of options out there, places to connect with those people to bring them into your classroom. I'd also recommend using ISU. If you have a connection to ISU, reach out to different professors or instructors and have them come in to your classroom as experts as well. So we've talked about having the experts coming in, but how can we as educators, Mike, create new partnerships?
I think that there's part of the process of being learners together. So sometimes that connection with, even in your own district, where a 7th grade class might partner with a 3rd grade class. And especially if you can collaborate on maybe not only just reading powers, but let's say you're studying the same phenomenon. Let's say you're studying weather. Well, as a 2nd grade looks at it, can that 7th grader have a mentorship role? And what are some of the tools out there? Personally, I'm loving Flipgrid because there's ways where we can monitor all the posts. So any post, I get to watch it before it goes live just to make sure there's that safety piece. Maybe it's going to be a cross district. Maybe it's going to be with like one of your favorite science methods teachers who you've had a few years ago, and you want to reach back out and see if we can collaborate for the second half, right? There's all kinds of these partnerships that happen. Kristi?
And I really want, if you're looking for these kind of partnerships and you don't know where to go, Flipgrid has a tab at the top of the educator page called Grid Pals. And I definitely would recommend that you check that out. It is other teachers and other students that have put themselves out there because they're interested in collaborating with someone. So it's kind of a built-in situation where you can just log right in and see who's out there looking for someone to collaborate with. So the next standard we wanted to talk about is creative communication and how we're using that and in our classrooms while we're remote, and how we plan to bring that into our classrooms when we come back to school. So the four standards, for creative communicators are choosing appropriate platforms and tools, responsibly repurposing and remixing resources, communicating complex ideas clearly, and customizing your message for your audience. These are four standards that have come into play into our classrooms while we're remote, even more than they normally have. But the former librarian in me would be remiss if I didn't share with you, Google changed their image searching abilities recently. So now if you do a Google image search, let's say for the dog, and select tools and usage rights, then underneath that, you can now sort by Creative Commons licenses. So as you're encouraging your students to use images that are free to use and share is what we used to pick when we did this. Now we have those images sorted into Creative Commons licenses and commercial and other licenses so that we can help our students make sure that we are responsibly using other people's intellectual property. Digital media has really come into play in my classroom. My 5th grade class for Makerspace used to run an Etsy shop. And so we would go through the whole process of the business design. We determined what materials we could sell at our school shop, and then we'd make them. Well, that's great when you're face-to-face, but when you're virtual, that's nearly impossible. So we had to take our same ISTE standards and just adapt. And so we are doing a unit this quarter on finding your voice, digital media for social good. And our students are blogging, podcasting, and becoming YouTubers. That's why we had the podcast guy from the Cardinals come in and talk. The Disney food blog ladies talk to us. So this is where our students are really taking the opportunity to find out what they're passionate about and share it out with other people. So for each of these 3 formats this quarter, they have created one of their samples. And then after they've created one of each of those 3 samples, then we've taken a look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These are the goals that the UN put into place in 2015 that they are hoping that by 2030, we can create a better world. So the goals are poverty, hunger. You can see all 17 of them here. Now we're giving our students the opportunity to look at these 17 goals, identify the ones that they're most passionate about. Not the ones that I'm passionate about, not the ones that I say, hey, let's do this, let's do that. I want them really to have their own excitement in what they're doing. So they're choosing then that blog, podcast, or video format to express and share their passions. And so that really has been one of the fun outcomes that I will definitely bring back to the classroom.
Even with those, with the goals, what's been fun for my science class is when we learn and connect what we're learning and why it's important. And the initial of like, well, clean water is important with the aquifer, but then they can start seeing other connections. Like, no, really, this is foundation, like has a foundation in poverty, and we take care of clean drinking water that gets them to their jobs, and it just helps frame why learning is important. With those questions of, well, why do we need to know this? And how do we become an educated citizen of the globe?
If you're interested in the Sustainable Development Goals, just Google SDGs. They have several goals, or of the goals, they have targets. Sorry, I was losing my word there. They have targets for each one. And so it's really fascinating, and the kids have really enjoyed looking through them. Our next takeaway from remote learning back into our classroom has been more and more student empowerment. So the students really owning their learning, taking an active role in choosing what they want to learn about, how they're going to achieve it, how they're going to demonstrate that competency. And if we look at those standards, they're really focused on goal setting and leveraging technology in that way, in building networks and customizing their learning environment, using technology for feedback, and then also the idea of what each type of technology is best used for and how to troubleshoot that. And so we've really focused with the Empowered Learner Standard on goals A, C, and D as our takeaway. So as students demonstrate learning, they're doing that how, Mike?
It's important, especially when we're looking digitally, how well they know their target, and how well, especially in like asynchronous learning, what is the specific learning goal, learning target, and how do they get there? I've been a huge fan of single point rubrics. A single point rubric, basically, for a simple definition of it, is if you break down like a big NGSS standard, for example, into the key components for a student, it's a nice way to merge between the two, like holistic versus analytical rubric approaches. So what I will do is we'll unpack a standard together, and then I'll list down some of the key elements of it. And instead of for me grading this rubric first, I have the kids self-assess themselves. So they'll look through, and just like one of Hattie's things about student learning is if we can have students give evidence of self-grading, is one of the higher indications of learning. So from that, I'll have them say, where are they struggling? What's evidence that they have for success? And it makes them really self-aware, make sure they have a really clear point for the target. There's a fantastic podcast and blog called Cult of Pedagogy, and this is one of our older ones. I think it's 2015-16, but it's still one that I love pointing people to every year about just different ways where we can assess. And how do we communicate learning and our learning targets to students that's age appropriate. Okay.
All right, so our next takeaway is more and more problem or project-based learning. As we have been in remote learning, we noticed a lot of people moving that direction last spring. Thinking about how we can make our students' learning meaningful and based off of real world problems so that we can increase engagement. So thinking about it this way, if our students are working through that design process or design cycle to solve real world meaningful problems to them, then the learning outcomes from that are making them more capable communicators, better critical thinkers, very creative, bigger into or more capable collaborators, maybe even. And all of those things are the things that we are wanting our students to be when they step away from the classroom, when they get to graduation and the collegiate level or into the workforce. So we're really trying to focus on giving our students more open-ended opportunities and time to really make their learning meaningful. Sorry. Peer feedback is another way that we have engaged our students. Mike, do you want to talk about this one?
So when we think about like when we show mastery work to our students, can they recognize not only our learning targets, but what does it look like when they get there? What does it look like if they have a great understanding or exceeded the standard? Where do we give them this opportunity? And it's really important because especially getting that feedback from their peers tend to be a little bit more meaningful than just feedback from me. I also know when I was starting teaching, my failure was they would do and they'd work on a project and I'd be there answering questions. But when they turned it in at the end of the week, that seemed like where a lot of my feedback was at the end of the process. And doing like peer feedback and having it more rigid in the beginning really helps prevent problems before they get into the submission phase of it. So you want to like fail quickly and fail often, they say. You want to get that feedback to them as quickly as you can. Two tools that I love using. EduFlow used to be called peer feedback or peer review, peer feedback. And it just got rebranded to EduFlow. It has a few more features. Basically what this software was, and it was a free one, and now there's a limited free and like a freemium model on this. But this one's so nice that it's going to be like, as soon as I run out of my frees, I want to start using it and actually paying for it. Students, especially working great with Google, can turn in an assignment through EduFlow. And what happens on EduFlow is it will randomize the work and then send it to different people in the class without the students' names being on it. So then kids can get feedback, but they're also protected and just being anonymous. The students will have, I create a rubric on how to grade it and what to look for and what feedback to give. And other students, you can set it, usually 3 students, will give feedback on other kids' work. And maybe it's going to be on the design, maybe it's going to be on the build, but feedback often throughout a cycle. What happens then is the kids then will get the feedback from those other 3 kids, and they will actually score how good the feedback is. So sometimes the kids will have the mindset of like, nice, good job, might be like friendly and nice, fun, warm feedback, but it's not really meaningful feedback, right? So what is really feedback that they can grow from? And there's a lot of safety things where they can flag things throughout. I love the platform a lot, and it's really, I'm impressed how quickly it's like brought up great points with the students. So it's been one of the more successful softwares to use. Floop is similar to this, but what I like about Floop, it's also on a freemium level where you get a little bit for free, but then they charge, is it does really good for images and PDFs. So the student who is building something, or the student who has a math sheet, and you want to use Floop, it's easier for the students to give feedback to specific parts. So if I show you my model that I've made of something at home, you can click and drag these different feedbacks different ways. It's also nice for teachers because then you have this feedback bank of all these comments. And it seems like sometimes our feedback can be repetitive. Like we see patterns in problems with students, and it saves us a little bit more time on how we give feedback to students to be more quick and more for them to get it back quicker. So the turnaround time comes better.
Another unexpected positive that came out of our remote learning experience is our teachers of the fine arts, of physical education, technology started having these weekly meetings, and feedback actually was one of the things that came up in that situation. And we were talking about how each of us have different formats for our feedback, and actually discussed as a group how we might use the same format across the board. So again, just another opportunity for growth when we come out of this.
Also, your feedback doesn't have to always be the same class. So if you're doing that partnership, imagine like your 7th graders giving feedback to a 4th grader. And sometimes for me, I'm lucky enough to have the same group of children twice, once in 7th and once in 8th grade, where my 7th graders can start looking at 8th grade work and seeing the difference, especially like using evidence and explaining evidence in their paper. Just lets them see what good exemplary work could look like.
And then UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. There are so many resources out there. And thinking about the feedback one that Metcalf is recently adding is MOTE, that audio feedback. It allows the teacher to give verbal feedback instead of just written out feedback. But Mike, did you have a couple others you wanted to share?
I love ReadWrite as a option. It does a lot of great note-taking, highlighting, where kids can highlight with different colors and then have pages sorted that way. The school's license is surprisingly very cheap compared to like the classroom version. So almost by the time you get 2 classrooms, you might as well get a school. I think also with this, one thing I want to kind of warn with the web store is when we start looking at, like, if let's say the student wanted to start exploring what the web store offers, there's so much there. We're going to look at the games, right? But back in the day, like right when Web 2.0 happened for us, vintage experienced teachers, we will say, not old, there's the thought of accumulation. There's a part of collection where we would go out and we would add this and we'd add these and we'd add all these pieces in and bookmark all these pages, and we would have pages and pages and pages of lists. And sometimes you see that with Chrome web apps. Like you'll look at someone's Chrome web app and they'll have buttons and buttons and buttons and buttons, and actually they'll have to have another app to hide some of the apps or to consolidate their apps because they've had so many of these other apps involved here. Are we helping our students by providing an overwhelming amount? Or is there a way as teachers, instead of collection, we curate and saying, here are 5 really great extensions that you can use. And maybe read write is one. And maybe here's a highlighting one. And here are some tools where we teach them how to accommodate. And yes, as teachers, we can push out through Chrome, but it's also letting them to have the power of choice of when they know and when they want to go get those apps as well. And we give them a safe, curated environment where they can go have access to these apps.
Excellent example of empowering their own learning. At Metcalf, we focus on learner qualities. This came from a discussion that started with what would it look like if we no longer reported effort on report cards? And the staff had been doing some work with growth mindset from Dweck, and then some of Hattie's work with making learning visible. And so after visiting New Zealand, Metcalf came up with 7 learner qualities. Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about what you observed when you were in New Zealand?
Yeah, we actually went to New Zealand and Sydney, and John Hattie was originally from University of Auckland before he went to University of Sydney. And we went to some of the schools, Stonefields, where he did a lot of work in seeing how they implemented it and how both at a level of differentiation for students, meaning where they're at, but also the responsibility, and the responsibility almost sounds like a negative word, but the empowerment they gave students on their learning. And I gotta tell you, it looks a lot similar like what online remote learning can be, where we can be there to support, we can be there to give progress, we can be there to coach, we can be there to feedback, but to also not just always talk about the content we're learning, but to be very self-aware and talk about the process of how they're learning. And I feel with my middle schooler kids, we spend a lot of time talking about the process of learning, whether it's like executive functioning skills, whether it's talking about just self-assessing themselves through different tools that we gave. But I find those discussions exciting, and I find there's almost a energy to them where they amplify each other's. And I'm looking forward to, like, over the last 3 years, Metcalf has always embraced these, and we've always referred to it like in our lessons, like, okay, today we're really going to use this phenomenon. We're going to start asking questions, right? And there's some play that just ties in nicely with these in the learning process. But in remote learning, we're really giving students the tools to learn. And it's not just like, you do this, you do this. It's almost turning that like, okay, what are you doing? What can we do? And we're still providing a scaffolding, we're still providing a structure. But if they're really asynchronous and if they're kind of on their own, how do we not make that a scary thought? And how do we make that, have that sense of agency and being meaningful to these students?
So we wanted to share with you this video that was created about the learner qualities. It's pretty short, so I'm going to.
This one's the longer one. This is the 9-minute one. Do we want to save it for them?
Yeah, maybe we'll put that at the end then. Is that okay?
Yeah, the shorter one's the slide 43 one. Sorry.
Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. All right, so as we think about those learner qualities and moving forward and giving our students the opportunity to own their learning and show what they're learning, we're really trying to focus in on their learning experience and that environment where we're inspiring our students through this transformational kind of learning, and we're getting them to amplify their voice. This is happening with more engagement, with that productive struggle, that grit that you saw on our learner quality list, and focusing more on growth instead of an end goal. So being self-aware of where we are and what our learning process is in order to get to that final demonstration of your understanding and your mastery. And the best way we're seeing this happen right now is through those cross-disciplinary units. So I think that's our next one. So in these cross-disciplinary units, we're trying to really engage our kids in these real-world problems in a way that empowers them to be researchers and co-directors, basically, of their own learning. One of the things that Mike and I were a part of together in trying to make these cross-disciplinary units happen was STEM Read from an early point in our career, or earlier point in our careers. And STEM Read is really an amazing program offered through NIU STEAM that brings the excitement for STEM and STEAM learning and connects it with literature. Mike, what is it that you always say? Love the
science, live the book. So
okay. Yes, love the science, live the book. I think that these are fantastic experiences for our students in that we have a shared background knowledge. We've all read maybe the same book, and now we are expanding on that through hands-on activities in our classrooms. Now, these used to be, back pre-COVID, giant events in big arenas where, 500-600 kids would get together at the same time, and you'd feel that energy. But these are units that can be applied to your classroom. It's once you've experienced them a few times, it's something that you see that connection instantly. So I would definitely recommend you look up the stemread.com because they are sharing so many of their resources for free right now with people so that you can use them and apply them to your learning experiences.
So for me, not being an ELA guy, what I love about it through the lens of science is the opportunities for the kids to be curious about a topic that I want them to be curious on, and the wide range that they offer all the way down to early elementary, pre-K, all the way to high school. So Fault in Our Stars and Cancer, Fuzzy Mud, which is a book from the person who wrote Holes, The One and Only Ivan. But
all the way down to even like Carnivores by Peter Reynolds, with a book that has very few words in it.
So if we think of like what The One and Only Ivan, then we start talking about animals being social creatures and looking at those kind of things. They tie so well into a lot of our standards we have to do for science. So it's an interesting combination that where sometimes some of my students who don't see themselves as a science person, but they start getting into the reading, the ELA part of it, it really blossoms their engagement.
I also think that connecting the literature to the science and the STEM is a great way to engage those reluctant science students, but also engage the reluctant reader. So I think it's two birds with one stone, I guess.
So while we're winding down, I think I didn't know if like the beginning of this year was going to have more of a negative tone. Like I think at the beginning, like August for me, it was a lot more just nervousness and like how scared we were. Just like, what is this going to look like? And man, if I hear we're building the plane as we're flying it one more time, man, I might get sick, physically sick by hearing that. Like I've never been on a plane where we build it when you fly. No, there's never a guy on the wing, but you hear that so much here. And I think now in about 7 weeks in and end of the quarters are starting to happen. and there's starting to be a little lag where there's a novelty and it's exciting to be back from summer vacation, but maybe people are kind of dipping down a little bit. And sometimes it's easy for us to focus on those 2 or 3 kids that we just can't get engaged and not look at all the awesome stuff that some folks are learning with. And I apologize, this is a high school video that we found, but just on the uplifting, I don't think we often give ourselves credit for the wins that we have. And while we don't always have, we can't say this is returning normal, I think we're having a lot more wins than we realize. And I don't think we hear that majority as often as we should.
When I was told that we were doing online school, I was kind of skeptical.
I knew it was going to be something weird because it's something, we haven't really done before.
I was kind of upset at not going to school anymore. I was going to miss all my friends, but online classes aren't that bad.
I thought it was going to be a big struggle together. In the beginning, I was like, well, how's that going to work? But it is going really, really well. It's a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I'm very impressed with how quickly they're able to do everything.
We're still learning at the same level we were before, which is pretty surprising.
I'm having to create my own schedule and be responsible to finish all my assignments.
They will give us like multiple assignments, but it won't be due until like Friday, and they'll give it to us on Monday.
I think we don't have sound anymore.
Tomorrow morning, and they'll open up.
One of my instructors for JROTC always makes videos and says, I hope everyone's well. If you need anything at all, reach out to anybody. We're always out to here to help you.
I think that my teachers have been putting forth a really good effort to try and help us seniors out.
I have a shirt that I got made for me. It's a senior 2020 quarantine.
As much as teens don't always like school, we definitely need it. So I feel like this is better than not being in school at all.
It's definitely going to be helpful. I don't think I could miss this instruction. I'd be so far behind.
I'm glad that we were able to continue school online. And I think it was a great idea.
I just applaud the teachers for being able to change their routine so quickly and still focus on the education of students as their #1 priority.
I just want to say, I appreciate all the teachers for everything they do, and they're heroes.
Thank you for working hard for us. Thank you for being flexible.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for what you're doing, and I appreciate you being there for us. It's really nice to see that you care.
So as we go, I think it's easy for us to hear those negative voices there, but just keep awareness, be self-aware on all the wins that we might be having. We may not see that as daily, and we may not see that as often, but I think we're teaching some of those skills, and we're teaching kids in ways where we just aren't able to in class, where they get to be a little bit more independent. We get to do some of these, we get to experiment. I feel like we have some freedom from at least our administration where it's okay to try new things. And this is a really time for us to be innovative in our approach.
So we wanted to finish up in the last 5 minutes with some time for questions and sharing. We would love to hear from you some of the things that you've experienced during this time that you would definitely like to take back to the classroom with you when we return face to face. So what are some of your wins or lessons learned? You can put it in the chat.
Zoom's probably overwhelmed with like everyone typing at the exact same time. That's why it hasn't popped up on the chat yet.
importance of engaging students in the classroom to hold their attention. Absolutely. What are some of the things that you're doing to do that? Recording lessons, I think that's a big takeaway for a lot of people. Students are thriving with smaller class sizes once you're in hybrid. Nice. Hopefully the important people who make decisions get to hear that too, right? That's been back full time. We've been focused on setting students up so that when they have to go remote, they're set up to function. How nice is that? That is a great gift that you have to be able to set that up in advance, for sure. I think that shows us that first part of our school year is really essential, building relationships and setting students up for success. Creating online materials that have been good for kids.
But Chad, how is it different than most years? That's what we're trying to get to.
I was gonna say, I think that Mr. Talon wears that nose often. That's awesome. Participating more. I saw AJ Giuliani just recently sent out a post about a discussion game that looked really fascinating to me. So I love that. Nearpod is a great tool. If you haven't tried that one out, I would definitely recommend that for synchronous and asynchronous. It works in both ways or both places. Nice. I guess, Kathy, I think you're absolutely right. Right before our session this afternoon, I had a teacher in my Imaginarium, and we were talking, and I said, oh, we're doing this session for T21 this afternoon. And I told her the topic was our takeaways, and she said her biggest takeaway from this is that even though she doesn't consider herself techie, that she can do it. And she is a year or two from retirement. And she says that, you know, now she understands that she can do it. She's not going to break things. And she has more confidence than she ever did before. And I think many teachers are feeling that little boost of, okay, well, I can do this now. So valid point.
I think there's something to be said too, where we model to our students that we were learners too. And for them to see us vulnerable in that way of not being this all know-it-all person where it's okay for you're learning and I'm learning and we're getting through this together. There's something about being human to our kids.
True story. And that's actually the second half of what she said. And I'm glad you said that for that. But she said, if I don't know how to do something, inevitably, she has 2 or 3 students in the class who are like, well, Mrs. So-and-so, you can just try clicking here and then that and then that. And they typically can walk her through it. So yes, it is definitely a time where we can be vulnerable and show our students that we're learners as well. Pear Deck, another great tool. Absolutely. Reversed assignments. Using QR codes, yes. Nice. I think you're right, Kathy. It is good. And I think that we need to, as a school, when we return or when we're in faculty meetings, to really make sure that our teachers are recognized for the hard work that they did, and not just in a general, oh, you're working very hard, this is great, but really identifying some of those steps that they took outside of their box. And hopefully, based off of what we're talking about today, then bringing it back to the classroom and kind of taking it to the next level when we are face-to-face. Mike, do you have any closing words or?
No, I'm just, I'm happy that we're having this at this time. I'm just keep on thinking of like what remote learning would have looked like in 1987. And I'm just excited to see once we get on the other side of this, looking back, like all the journals and articles and the boom of information, like research that we dedicated to teaching, what all the stuff that we accomplished. Being a father of a high schooler and just thinking about when she goes to college, how this experience of being much more independent than she was comfortable for right away. I'm just waiting to see like how that's going to set her up with confidence later on in her life that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
I think that education has its opportunity to change and improve and move forward, and not look like the same thing it did in 1980. And so if we don't do it, if not now, when? And so I guess that's my take on it.
Thank you all for your Friday afternoon, giving it up to spend with us, although my Friday afternoon looks a lot like my Tuesday afternoon and my Wednesday morning, but we still appreciate it here, and it really meant a lot to see some former of my students popping back in and saying hi. So
thank you, Kristi and Mike, for leading us in thinking about what's beyond normal. And attendees, thank you for participating in the conference today. It was different than before, but I think it was really, really good. And on the T21 website, which I think I just posted, yes, if you go there, if you're interested in PD credits, they're available through ROE 17. There's a form on the T21Con website. And there will be a survey emailed after the conference. We would love to hear your feedback, both about this year and what you think might be good for next year. So please look for that email, and we look forward to your responses. Hope you have a great weekend.